You're listening to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Here are your hosts, Fran Chismar and Tom Kinezic.
It is a new year, and we have new music even. Welcome back to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast presented by Pinelands Nursery. I am Fran Chismar.
And I'm also Fran Chismar. Just kidding. That was my fumble from last week. I'm Tom Kinezic, and welcome to episode 38.
Wow, I should have introduced myself as Tom. What a lost opportunity that was, yeah. Man.
Well, we're excited to be back to our original format.
Yeah, it's been a long time because of the holiday and how we record it. I don't think we've done one with a meet our guest in probably a month.
Yeah,
I'd say it's been a good month. So
yeah, probably even longer because it was before Christmas.
Yeah,
so but that's been over a month, right?
Yeah, but it's nice to get back to this because it's been a while, and it's going to flip around a little bit because before we do another rooted discussion, we're going to have another meet our guest and another buzz. But I feel like now that we have the three segments, the rooted discussions, meet our guest, and the buzz, I feel like the podcast finally, it only took almost a year, is fully realized.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It allows us to do everything we want to do.
Yeah.
While also providing like good content the entire time.
And it gives people the opportunity to skip around. If you don't like the buzz, you don't have to listen to our chatter. If you're not a fan of that, if you just like the guest, you could just listen to the guest. So it kind of gives you the opportunity to flip around or listen to all of it and get a pretty rounded
thing. And you mentioned rooted discussions with the last buzz episode, we were talking about how well that was doing. It's almost our number one episode now.
It will be by the end of the week. In 2 weeks, it has skyrocketed to our number one episode, which is crazy.
Yeah. So Duke Farms, which has been on the number one spot since the very beginning. It was the second episode
in March,
and it's been that number one episode since it aired.
Yeah, so for almost a full year. Yeah, it's kind of crazy that the rooted discussions kind of got that much steam and picked up that quickly. So we're really thankful, and we see it carrying through to the last buzz, and hopefully it carries through with this one as well. So but it's a brand new year. We have all new music.
Oh yeah. New theme music for Rude Discussions, which you guys will hear in about a month from now. And new theme music for this episode as well.
Yeah, I want to give a huge thank you to Egocentric Plastic Men out of Philadelphia for lending their song "Can't" for a new theme music. I own this song beforehand, and I've actually seen them live. So I was really thrilled that they offered this song to us. So make sure you check out Egocentric Plastic Men wherever you stream your music and go see them live. They're a great live band. Once shows start back up again, they play pretty regularly in the Philadelphia area.
Yeah.
So,
but the little clip you played for me, I thought really fit the identity of this episode.
I do too. They each kind of have their own little identity, and I like that. From this point forward, they'll all stand alone.
So. And with that, we have a very special guest today, someone that really needs no introduction to us. Yeah. So, but I'm sure he's going to have an introduction for himself. So why don't we bring him into the room and
let's do it
and see how things start.
Awesome.
So, Emil, you're here.
Welcome.
Hello. Nice to see you guys.
Very good to see you as well.
So, Emil, I was saying that we know you pretty well, so we don't need an introduction from you, but we want you to introduce yourself to our listeners, and I'm sure probably quite a few of them know you as well, but for those of you outside the area, I want Emil to tell you who he is and why he's so important to us.
Yes.
Sure. So my name's Emil DeVito, Manager of Science and Stewardship at New Jersey Conservation Foundation since 1989. So that's a long time.
Wow.
Going on my 31st year, I guess. Well, 31. I sort of lost track of time with 2020 and COVID, but I guess it's 31 full years. So I guess I'm in my 32nd year. I go all over the state doing both advocacy work and stewardship work and, just a whole variety of things. got my PhD in ecology at University of Wisconsin, but my thesis was regarding bird communities and plant communities in the Pine Barrens. So I've been around for a long time.
Are you originally from New Jersey?
Yes, I have lived all my life in South Plainfield, except in Middlesex County, except when I was at graduate school in Wisconsin, and I went to undergraduate school at Rutgers.
Wow. And no plans on leaving South Plainfield?
Where am I going to go?
I was thinking, like, that's a long time to be at one place, but I was thinking that's the same year I started in the nursery industry. 1919. It was February 16th, 1989. I started, so it's kind of crazy. It's been a long journey. Things have changed.
Yeah, well, things haven't changed so much in the conservation world. I mean, it's just, a constant struggle to save land, manage land, deal with problems, advocate for better policies. I mean, it's really, you can win a battle 100 times in a row, but if you lose it the 101st time, you lost everyone. So it's things haven't really changed.
And we could touch a little bit on policy a little bit. For our listeners, we said the last episode that our next rooted discussion is going to be the government's role in restoration, and you're actually going to be one of our guests on that one. So I don't want to delve too deep into it. I'd like to save a lot of it for that episode.
Sure.
But we can definitely touch on that as well. I thought for our listeners that don't know the New Jersey Conservation Foundation, if you could just tell them a little bit about the organization and their history.
Sure. So the Conservation Foundation was started in the late 1950s. It was called the Save the Great Swamp Committee.
Okay.
And it was based on the battle to keep the New York and New Jersey Port Authority from building a jet port in the Great Swamp in Morris County. Wow. And it was started by Helen Fensky and a number of other local folks in Morris County who decided they were going to battle the Port Authority, and they were successful ultimately. And the result was the Great Swamp National Wildlife Refuge.
All right.
So once the Great Swamp Refuge happened in the early 60s, and in fact, that was the country's first wilderness area is in the Great Swamp National Wildlife Refuge, first federal wilderness.
Oh, wow.
And because that's when the Wilderness Act was passed.
Okay.
So when you go to the Great Swamp, one half of it is the observation area with boardwalks and all sorts of things, and the other half is the unmanaged section, just the swamp forest and the streams and their trails. But it's it's a wilderness area. There are no structures of any kind or anything like that. It meets the definition of federal wilderness.
Wow.
But anyway, that's the Great Swamp Refuge, and then for a short time, the New Jersey Conservation Foundation was called the North Jersey Conservation Foundation for a few years. And then all of a sudden it looked like things were heating up in the battle to save the Pine Barrens. And so the name changed to New Jersey Conservation Foundation.
Okay.
And of course that, in the 60s and 70s, there were the big pushes to get the Green Acres program running at the state level, saving lots of parkland. And also the Pinelands Preservation Act, which is probably, to me, the most important thing that's ever happened in New Jersey.
Yeah.
In terms of, preserving a really, intact, large piece of the environment. So
it's still a struggle.
Yeah.
Oh, of course, everything will always be a struggle. Nothing will ever let up, I mean, imagine the pressure that there's going to be on the Pine Barrens when sea level rise in 75 years wipes out all the shore communities, and all those people have to go somewhere, because it's inevitable. Sea level is going to go up 3, 4, 5 feet, and there's going to be many places that are going to be wiped off the map.
It's going to change. Yeah.
We won't see it, but it'll be, there's going to be, huge conservation battles and issues regarding a shortage of land. And that's always going to be. So anyway, then over the years, it was New Jersey Conservation Foundation never really kept land of their own for the first roughly 30 years of their existence. They would help counties save land, help municipalities save land, help the state save land, occasionally own a piece of land for a short period of time, and then sell it to counties, towns, the state.
Okay.
Many examples of parks that you've gone to all over New Jersey, we were in the chain of title at some point. Because a lot of times we could move faster than a government agency could move. So in other words, a government agency would know that they wanted to save a piece of land, but it takes time to come up with the bond acts, the budgets, that kind of thing. So the first 30 years, just like with the Great Swamp Refuge, we sort of, acquired pieces of land and then flipped them to government agencies. And many land trusts, and we still do that all over New Jersey. We still acquire lands and turn them over to government agencies. But about 1990, we started holding on to pieces of land and managing pieces of land of our own. And of course, now we have well over 20,000 acres of land that we own outright.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. I didn't realize it was that much.
Well, the Franklin Parker Preserve is a big chunk. That's about 12,000.
Yeah.
And then we have another, 5,000 or 6,000 in the Pine Barrens, scattered about in slightly smaller pieces than the Franklin Parker Preserve, Candy Ashman Preserve, Michael Huber Preserve, and a few others. And then we have smaller holdings all over New Jersey. Some are more like greenways, like the Wickecheokee Creek in Hunterdon County.
Yep.
We have many hundreds of acres along the entire length of the Wickecheokee Creek. And we now have holdings, in virtually every county in New Jersey. And we own a lot of forests, farmlands, wetlands, urban parks. We have a big project now at Gateway Park in Camden on Admiral Wilson Boulevard.
Oh.
We were very active in northeastern New Jersey in the 90s, identifying lands to be saved in the Arthur Kill watershed and in and around the city of Newark. And many of those lands eventually all got preserved. But again, those were assisting the governments. And then we have an easement program, a conservation easement program, which I don't, we have a complete separate set of people working on stewarding conservation easements. Those are on private lands. And, that's a big job. We have well over 100 conservation easements on farms and forests and all sorts of different types of land all around New Jersey. And that's a lot of work too, making sure that the conservation easements are followed by the landowners.
Yeah.
It's very easy for a landowner to make a mistake, do something that the conservation easement doesn't allow because the landowners change. One landowner has a conservation easement, they sell their land, the new landowner doesn't understand, makes a mistake, so those can be problematic. So you have to constantly monitor those conservation easements and keep up a dialogue with the landowners to make sure that the easements aren't, that problems don't occur on the conservation easements.
And
those are generally not open to the public. Sometimes they might have an access trail or something, depending on, how they originated.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a big change coming from a grassroots effort to save one area to encompassing 20,000 acres in New Jersey. That's a huge change.
Yeah, it's a huge change. We started out mostly as an advocacy group and an organization that would assist governments. And then the problem is that nobody knew who we were because, we didn't have anything of our own.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was probably the thing that led us to deciding to keep a few places, try to have some premier preserves of our own. For example, we've been involved in some very famous places. Wells Mills Park in Ocean County, a spectacular park, was saved by us. We were involved in the negotiations for Cape May Meadows Preserve near Cape May Point.
Okay.
All sorts of places like that. I could name 50 places where, we were very heavily involved. Pyramid Mountain with Tripod Rock in Morris County. All sorts of spectacular places that you wouldn't have any idea that we had anything to do with them. And so at some point, our staff and trustees, our board of trustees decided, we can't remain anonymous anymore.
Yeah.
And we need to start doing things that, we keep our name on them.
Mm-hmm. How much of the land of that 20,000 acres would not be open to the public?
Oh, it's almost every single acre that we own in fee is open to the public.
Okay.
Wow.
All right.
Yeah.
Wow. That's wonderful.
There might be a few tiny exceptions where, they might be inaccessible or, for one reason or another, small portions of preserves might be closed down from time to time because of a rare species issue or something.
Yeah.
But they're basically all open to the public.
Wow. That's awesome. Yeah. That's fantastic.
Now, 20,000 acres, and you mentioned how you have to constantly protect a lot of these lands from just oncoming threats. Like I think you said you could win 100 times, but if you lose 101st, it's all gone. That's got to be expensive. Just the land one in New Jersey, so everything's expensive. But
I mean, there's an attitude that's creeping in that you hear from time to time that people say, "Oh, we've preserved enough land, we can't take care of it. Why are we preserving more?" We completely disagree with that. Mm-hmm. The race to save land in New Jersey is, in fact, it's going to get even to be a more difficult race because of COVID. We're finding that, people don't necessarily want to live in the cities like they may have thought 2 to 3 years ago. And it's, going to be a much more of pressure on the housing market for new development. Yeah. Much of it is good. It's going to be on, redeveloping cities and making the cities more livable, but there's still going to be tremendous pressure on the suburbs. So,
we're seeing it here in other ways because with directly affiliated COVID, people are stuck at home. You're ordering more things, whether it's food or just toiletries or anything from Amazon. And we're seeing here in Columbus, New Jersey, where we have a lot of open space. So a lot of that open space is going to warehouses.
Right.
And, and that's been over the lifestyle change over the last couple of years, but I think it's getting accelerated through COVID.
Right. The warehouse boom is incredible. I mean, it's just incredible. Warehouses are popping up anywhere near any kind of major artery.
Yeah, because we're real close to 295 and the turnpike. Right. It's going crazy. Mm-hmm. So it's
going crazy. Right.
We definitely see it. So it's plus we're seeing the property values skyrocketing around here as well.
Right.
So
it's really a shame because the warehouse belt, because of where the turnpike is in 295, it was some of our most productive farmland.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The best soil in New Jersey for growing crops is the intercoastal plain, and we're losing it so fast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the farmland preservation program is having a hard time keeping up. So again, this is not about ecological restoration, but one of the things we're working very hard on is the siting of solar utility scale solar development, because we need to switch to renewable energy. We're fighting pipelines. We're fighting gas pipelines all over the place, natural gas pipelines, and we're doing well in some of those battles.
Yeah.
And we want to see solar, but some of the solar is being proposed in the worst places, in the middle of agricultural retention, prime farmland, instead of on rooftops and in, parking lots and in industrial areas. So,
yeah, I mean, some of the more inventive things that I've saw that I've liked were like the Patco stations in southern New Jersey, that all the parking lots were covered with solar panels. Mm-hmm. That's
right. And there's a bill in the legislature right now to remove some of the insurance problems for putting solar panels on top of warehouses. One of the issues why solar panels are not being put on top of these giant warehouses is having to do with having things on the roof and insurance concerns.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's an impediment that needs to be removed, because we can't, we shouldn't be having solar panels compete with prime farmland that the farmland program is trying to save. There's a proposal right now in Salem County for an 800-acre solar farm in the middle of all the preserved farmland.
Yeah.
So, those are the kinds of things we want solar, but we don't want it in the wrong place. We don't want to see forests covered over with solar panels. We don't want to see our best farms covered over with solar panels. And at the same time, we want solar panels because we need to get off natural gas and onto renewables.
Yeah.
So,
it creates
all difficult choices.
Yeah, it creates a whole different issue with wildlife and things like that. It's hard. Hopefully the right choices can be made there, or the policy can be changed for that. When Tom mentioned expenses, where does New Jersey Conservation Foundation get their funding for a lot of these purchases? Is it membership?
Most of the time, conservation easements on farmland are through funding from the federal Farmland Ranch Land Protection Act.
Okay.
Most of the federal money for farmland preservation that flows to New Jersey, much of it, if not most of it, is funneled through New Jersey Conservation Foundation. I don't have the exact numbers on that because I don't do it. That's another set of people at the foundation. And because the restrictions that come with some of the federal money are not always looked upon favorably by some of the state and county agencies. So we end up working with the farmers who want to work with the federal money.
Okay.
And so we save a lot of farms with the federal money, over and above all of the Garden State Preservation Trust money that preserves farms. We work on those projects too, but sometimes those projects don't involve the federal money.
Okay.
But all of the farmland preservation funds come from the various sources of either federal or state or county or municipal open space dollars. And we just help, amass all those different funds to put the project together. And then usually the county or the, state end up having those farmland conservation easements.
And that's important.
Sometimes we keep them too. We do have a lot. Like I said, we have over 100 conservation easements.
Wow.
And we keep some of them and monitor them ourselves. And then for the forest lands, again, almost all the money to actually purchase land comes from, a variety of sources. It could be natural resource damage funds. It could be federal land and water conservation funds. It could be state green acres funds. It could be municipal or county open space trust funds. So what we do is we, also foundations and grants from corporations, that kind of thing. We figure out a way to, piece together the funding to save the various patches of land that we deem most important. Again, I don't hardly do any of that. Sometimes I get involved in some of that. I used to do more of that 20 years ago, but we have, over 35 people on staff, and many of them are involved with piecing together all these projects. We just closed on a huge preserve in the Sourland Mountains of, the Somerset and Hunterdon County border.
Okay.
And we're working also with the Sourlands Conservancy and Mercer County. We can talk about some of those stewardship things in a minute when we get to some of those ecological restoration issues. But basically, the funding that we get from private individuals and from individual donors and corporate donors, most of that goes to supporting the people who do all this work.
Okay.
Right. And then the actual money that's needed to buy the land, you're talking millions and millions of dollars. That usually comes from, a variety of funding sources that are, sources that are dedicated to buying open space.
I'm glad you brought up the Sourlands Conservancy, because one of the things we were going to ask, 20,000 acres is a lot of property to manage. And we were wondering, how do you manage those preserves? Are they actively managed, or are they let just to be natural?
For the most part, they're left in a natural state, except where we do, ecological restorations.
Okay.
So, for example, at the Franklin Parker Preserve, we restored about almost 1,000 acres of cranberry bogs that were abandoned in the early 2000s. We've restored them to natural wetlands. You guys have been heavily involved in providing plants for all of that. Mostly Atlantic white cedar is what you have provided to us. Then we have, smaller projects here and there along streams, inside small deer exclosures, various projects where we do some restoration work. But for the most part, we do a lot of control burning on our preserves in the Pine Barrens. We do some experimentation with reestablishment of rare plants.
Okay.
So here and there we do some small scale projects. We're hoping, like for example, the Sourland Mountains, the forest there, some of the tracts of forest there are starting to become fairly mature, and have huge trees on them. The trees are growing at spectacular rates. The state has indicated that they're a good carbon sink.
Okay.
And so we're hoping to work with the state to promote the idea of proforestation, leaving these forests intact, letting them sequester carbon well into the future. And the state of New Jersey desperately needs to establish a system for carbon credits, so that, and the state needs to start that system on state land, because the state owns so much forest. And one of the folks at the DEP was explaining to us that if the state can, designate a lot of carbon reserves, and that would help deal with all the setup costs for establishing a carbon program in New Jersey, and then private landowners like conservation groups and private citizens who own land could start entering that carbon sequestration, carbon retention program to fight climate change. And then we could be receiving money for preserving, for sequestering carbon in our forests. But really, we can't do that piecemeal. The state needs to start that program, get it going on public land, and then everybody else can hop on.
Yeah, and that preserving that land and the sour lands is pretty important, knowing the kind of loss they're going to incur just on ash.
Right.
They're having troubles, not even just from encroachment. It's
right. So there's two kinds of forest. Like in the Sourlands is the perfect example. There's the forest on historic soil that's never been agriculture, and it doesn't have a big ash component. It's mostly oak, hickory, beech, various later successional species. And then you have all these abandoned farmlands that from, the late 1800s, early 1900s, and they're just ash dominated forests, and they're emitting carbon. They're dying wholesale.
Yeah.
And emitting carbon. They need to be restored. So that's a huge problem that we need to tackle. We need to figure out how to restore all these forests that are basically understories of invasive species with canopies of ash, and they're just turning into giant weed piles. So that's a big problem.
So you mentioned, well, let me ask this question because I'm going to shift gears. So do you get involved in management for like the easeways and properties you don't own? Do you offer management that way, or consulting, I guess?
No, we're not. We're not a consulting firm. I mean, we work with other NGO partners. We have stewardship symposia, meetings. We share ideas, and we'll work with any partner that we can. But we don't write plans for people. We don't act as consultants, other than sharing ideas. I mean, I'm on the phone all the time sharing ideas. But we're not in the business of contracting as consultants.
So you mentioned federal dollars, and I know we want to not get too heavily in this, and we talked about policy. How important, how important is the government in the role of this, and what needs to change? How are we in a good state right now, or is there important policy missing? Has it changed over the last 10 years in New Jersey? I know I'm probably opening a whole can of worms here.
Huge can of worms. I mean, the government does a tremendous job saving land, right? New Jersey is a leader. Our Green Acres program is unbelievable, right? We're saving land, spending the money, preserving the land for the future. And again, it's my view that you can't preserve too much land. You can't worry about stewardship and stop saving land. because if we don't save the land, we won't have anything to restore.
Yeah.
So naturally, there are a lot of patches of land that have seemingly intractable problems, right? Overabundant deer, invasive species, diseases, pests, pathogens. Well, some of those problems are virtually intractable. But if we save the land, someday, we might get a handle on some of those problems. One thing that I wish the state would fund more is the Philippa Lampe lab, for studying biological control.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right before COVID hit, I know there was going to be a release of some sort of for Pete's sakes, I'm just drawing a blank right now, at Bulls Island State Park. There was going to be a release for some sort of biological control agent for Japanese knotweed.
Okay.
Now, to me, that's one of the most important species that if we could get biological control of, that would be incredible, right? Because Japanese knotweed is pervasive, and especially pervasive in urban areas, in suburban areas, along rivers, in riparian systems. And if we could get biological control of Japanese knotweed, that would open up literally thousands of acres in areas where people desperately need open space with native species, with pollinators, with, healthy systems. And so I don't even know what happened because of COVID, if they were able to start that program at Bulls Island State Park to see, like the first test on Japanese knotweed along the Delaware River, which would be just incredible.
That would.
We need to do that with so many different species. We need to be, and then imagine if we could get control of some of these invasive species, then that would open up a palette of acres of all types for replanting native plants.
Plus it might also curb some of the invasive insects that we're encountering. If there's less host plants for spotted lanternfly.
Right. Well, the spotted lanternfly, well, I'm not sure. I think initially it was thought that it absolutely must have Ailanthus to reproduce. I'm not sure if that is still the current thinking. But certainly, if we could control Ailanthus, that would certainly, be a big boost to helping out with the spotted lanternfly problem.
But I guess we won't know until we get it under control.
Right. Some of these things it'll take a long time to find out, but that's one issue that we need, and don't get me wrong, there have been people, Mark Mayer, worked for the state for a long time on the hemlock problem, on the, for Pete's sake, mile a minute and the purple loosestrife, and they've done fabulous work. But that needs to be magnified, 50-fold. There need to be far more people doing that work on far more species.
Yeah. When you were talking about the biological controls, what kind of things are they using as a biological control for invasive species?
Well, it's generally insects. I mean, I'm pretty sure, like I said, I don't actually do the work, but I'm pretty sure that there's a weevil that's been developed for mile a minute vine.
Wow.
And I can't remember which kind of an insect it was that was going to be tested on Japanese knotweed. And then there were a couple of beetles, right, that were used and have really good success with purple loosestrife. So, it's, you have to go to the countries of origin of these plants and figure out, what their natural enemies are, and then test them and make sure that they don't jump species. But the work can be done. It generally takes about 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
From start to finish to come up with a biological control agent for any one species. That 10 years is not a long time when you think about it.
No.
I mean, in the vast scheme of things, 10 years and a few $1 million, and you can deal with generally most of our invasive species, and that would allow us to do a tremendous amount of ecological restoration someday in the future.
Yeah, and I think part of it is education too. It's, and I know for as long as I can remember, there's been like an invasive species, not council for the state, just to try to make plants deemed invasive and not available for sale. But the nursery industry has fought it for so
Yeah.
long.
Right. Well,
And you can find so many landscapes that you walk by that still have burning bush and barberry and
Right,
all these things.
right.
And you can buy them.
Yeah.
well, and so there's two levels there. We had an invasive species council in the early 2000s, and it was disbanded.
Yeah.
Which was a shame. I was on it. Many other good people were on it. Michael Van Cleef wrote the plan, and he's, Michael Van Cleef is like, the source when it comes to dealing with.
I don't remember what episode.
Invasive species.
Yeah, we had him on about a month ago.
And my dad was on there as well, and that's, to this day, he says that's one of the things he's most proud of was being on that
Right.
council.
And we were doing really good work, and then we were disbanded a few weeks after Governor Christie took office. So that was a problem.
Yeah.
And we haven't been reconstituted, which is a shame. But I forgot what I was going to say about that. There's another thing, which is, emerging invasive species. There's so many species that keep popping up, new things.
Yeah.
And that's really difficult because you generally don't notice them until they get out of until the genie escapes from the, from the lantern. So
that's true.
So that's a big problem is catching new ones before they become a big problem. Like, for example, now spotted lanternfly. I mean, it's come completely across the state. I've seen it in East Jersey now.
Yeah.
Originally it was close to the Delaware River, and in a couple of years it's come all the way to almost the Raritan Bay.
Yeah,
so
emerging invasive species was actually a pretty big topic we talked about with Mike Van Cleef, and that was episode 32. I just looked it up. So
awesome.
If you haven't listened to that one, go ahead and listen to that one at home. And it's funny, you said 10 years really isn't that long of a time. It seems like a long time, but you look at spotted lanternfly, it was first discovered, I think, in 2014, 2015. So while it's becoming a pretty big problem here, we've even seen some in our area of New Jersey. Not nearly as much as they're seeing in Pennsylvania, even other parts of New Jersey, but it's not a problem when you get outside of the mid-Atlantic, really.
I was at my oldest son's, one of his college lacrosse games in Upper Bucks County, and it was in the middle of an open field, and they were crawling through the grass. They were
I've heard horror stories like that.
I had never seen anything like it. It was literally, you were just sitting there swatting them like gnats. That's how many the kids were picking off of there. Yeah, it was. I've never seen anything like that. So it was, that was probably one of the worst case scenarios. I've seen one or two here, but nothing like that.
But as a proof to that point, it's only been, I guess, 6 years now since it was discovered. And if we had started researching it, which I'm sure they have 10 years ago, and they're able to come up with a solution, a blip on the radar if they're able to get it under check. But if they aren't doing the research and they aren't getting it under check, then it can become
the key there is funding priorities. There's so much money put into ecological restorations. You guys must know, right? You grow all these, that photo behind you, Fran, a sea of magnificent native species, and I'm sure you guys see them get put into restorations, and then what happens 10, 15, 20 years down the line if those restorations aren't properly cared for, or if they didn't get the hydrology right and they end up a sea of Phragmites or something.
And I've heard great success stories, and I've heard horror stories. There's one customer that we had that did a project that took probably like 4 to 5 years, and they were saying at the end they couldn't even use it as a reference because it was completely taken. There was no invasive species management put in, so the whole thing had been taken over by invasives. Right.
Or, and it might not, sometimes it might not be invasives. It might be that the deer, don't allow your plants to grow. So you need deer fencing, or sometimes if the hydrology isn't right, and with climate change, a lot of these places that have been restored are going to change. So I think sometimes we need to shift a little bit of that money that's spent on engineering and sort of really expensive restoration projects and get some invasive species work going. And then that would, like I said, if we could get rid of Japanese knotweed on our floodplains and some of the other floodplain weeds, the other one in North Jersey and some of the big river floodplains would be the yellow flower, the Japanese yellow flower. You help me out.
I'm
I'm
drawing a blank.
Is
the thing that looks like marsh marigold, but it's not.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, and I can't think
Anyway.
of the name of it.
It's
Yeah.
good. I'm too old. It's going to pop into my head, in 15 minutes. But anyway, if we could get those species under control, then we could be planting Virginia bluebells and all sorts of other, spectacular species that you guys grow, and not having them get taken over by invasives.
And you make a great point too. As things change, these places that have been restored, and you have climate change and the elevation changes, that's just going to open space for more invasives to come in.
Right. What I like to say is that weeds are going to win.
Yeah.
That's why they call them weeds. And so many times we've done it. We've tried things, small projects here and there, and sometimes they work, but sometimes the weeds win.
Yeah.
And so you have to be pretty judicious. One of the things we've been talking with Mercer County and the Sourlands Conservancy just in the last few weeks is making very inexpensive little 1 acre deer fences.
Mm-hmm.
And we're hoping to do a bunch of those this year in the forest, maybe in a light gap. Where we see that an ash tree is going to die. Maybe there's a big ash tree in the middle of a big, beautiful hardwood forest, but we know we're going to lose that ash tree. So what if we fence the acre around it? It's going to become a light gap, and we plant it now with trees and shrubs and herbaceous plants that are going to take advantage of that light gap. And, inside a deer fence, so that when that light gap forms, instead of being taken over by wineberry and multiflora rose or whatever it might be, we already have all the native plants already there, and they're protected from the deer. I think we should just be making these little Noah's arks of common species, and then if you plant them with the trees and shrubs and some spice bush or viburnums or whatever, then the seed sources are there, so that someday if we get the deer herd under control,
then you can kind of connect those.
Then you can connect the dots.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I'm having one of those days. I just complete that thought in my head, just woo right out. It's let me try to gather that thought. Go ahead, Tom. Go ahead.
One of the things when you were just talking to me, it reminded us of a project that we were told about not too long ago, where they had a stream bank or a river bank, and it was full of Phragmites, and they had to strip all the Phragmites out, and then they saw all the stuff that was growing. And Fran, you probably remember, it was like Peltandra, Sagittaria.
It was just off 295, just north of us, in Bordentown, or like going up towards
Trenton. So like in Trenton Marsh or near Trenton Marsh.
Yeah. Yes.
But just by removing the invasives, you gave all these natives that were in the seed bank new life.
Yeah, it was Mark Gallagher at Princeton Hydro was the one telling me about that success.
And you find out that natural systems are incredibly more resilient than you would have ever believed.
Yeah.
Because the natives are still there, hanging on. You put up a little deer fence. I put up a deer fence only about as big as a half of a tennis court, just one player's side of a tennis court. Yeah. I put up a deer fence in the Watchung Reservation in 1995 or 6.
Okay.
So that's 24 years ago or so. And it's one of these forests that you would have characterized as what Mike Van Cleef likes to call the empty forest syndrome. The deer had eaten everything in sight. There was just nothing left. So, except Japanese stiltgrass.
Okay.
So we put up a deer fence, and it was sort of on the edge of a light gap. One of the big old oak trees had died. And so the deer fence kind of just was partly in the light gap and partly in the shade of the forest.
Okay.
And it was just bare ground with Japanese stiltgrass. And after 4.5 years, it was still bare ground with Japanese stiltgrass. And I thought, there's no hope. Just forget it. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter what we do in this forest. It's just never going to be anything but Japanese stiltgrass. Well, how wrong I was. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, Jack in the Pulpits, Maple Leaf Viburnum started to appear inside this little fence from pieces of root, corms, whatever, that had been barely hanging on to life, and they were probably putting up a tiny little sprout and then getting browsed off every winter. But finally, they built up enough energy, and all of a sudden, the whole place filled up with native species.
Wow.
Nothing was ever planted in it. And now, if you go there, you can't see from one side of the half tennis court to the other. Even in the wintertime, it's nothing but native shrubs.
And that's how it's supposed to look.
Yeah.
And right, that's how the whole forest is supposed to look.
Yeah.
And we didn't do anything. We just put up a deer fence. We put up the deer fence because that was when the Watchung Reservation had a committee to try to convince the freeholders to establish deer management, because there were 350 deer per square mile. My numbers could be wrong. It might be 250 deer per square mile in the Watchung Reservation in the early 90s. And so we put up a little deer fence as a little demonstration project, and then they started managing the herd. And Dan Bernier has done an incredible job up there, getting it only took a few years to get the herd down to 20 deer per square mile, which is still a lot. It's still too many.
Yeah.
It's probably okay to have 20 deer per square mile if you have a good forest.
Yeah.
But if you have an empty forest, every little plant that pops its head up at 20 deer per square mile, it's like a lollipop in a bowling alley. So, so they find it. So, but it's taken 25 years. Inside the fence, the forest has completely grown back. And outside the fence at 20 deer per square mile, the forest is growing back now. They're native shrubs. They're starting to get some height. Worm-eating warblers, which are a shrub nesting, ground nesting, warbler. They've returned to the Watchung Reservation because they've kept up the deer management for, 25 years, almost 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the point. Think of the work, right? Well, they've got it down to a science. And they run the program every year. Hopefully they'll continue to do it the right way. Dan Bernier isn't going to live forever,
Yeah.
Nobody does. And, God only knows what might happen in 20, 30, 40 more years, right? But at least the Watchung Reservation has a chance. Now it's up to the next generation of people to keep it going. We were up there. I missed the field trip, but, folks went up there from Natural Heritage Program to one of the Natural Heritage priority sites that had been identified on, the old maps on one of the trap rock glades up on the Watchung Reservation. And fortunately, almost all of the rare species were still there. And, they may have been gone if the Watchung Reservation Union County Park System hadn't been managing for the last 30 years, because the deer problem only got really bad in the 80s.
Yeah.
I mean, early on in the talk, you were going to ask me, how have I seen the forest change?
Yeah.
I've got a story.
30 years and you spend a lot of time in those forests.
Yeah. So I got a story for you. Back in the late 70s, when I was taking plant community courses at Rutgers with Jim Quinn and Dick Foreman and Ted Stiles and Stuart Pickett, who were like the fathers of, modern plant community ecology and forest ecology in New Jersey. We would go on a field trip to a place called Dark Moon Farm, which was up in Sussex County. It was owned by a family named Pittenger. And we would bring the Rutgers van up there with all the students, and we get out and knock on the door, and Mrs. Pittenger would say, "Oh, hello," and she would tell her husband, "Oh, the Rutgers students are here, and go ahead, go look for your plants." And we would go back through these cornfields up onto a limestone ridge, and the place was incredible. You were afraid to step into the forest. This was in the late 70s. You were literally afraid to step into the forest for stepping on some rare woodland wildflower. Every kind of doll's eyes, cohosh, buttercup, you name it. Every amazing ginseng, dwarf ginseng.
Wow.
Every plant imaginable, that bloodroot, all the things that you you would take photographs, with your old Kodachrome slide film back in the 70s. You just couldn't wait to go to this place. Then I went off to Wisconsin. 10 years later, I came back and I taught ecology at Rutgers. And I took the kids up there for a field trip, and I said hi to Mrs. Pittenger. She was, much older. And we went back in the woods, and it was all gone. Wow. There was literally nothing left. You were lucky to find one trout lily, or a couple of spring beauties. I mean, I was devastated. I was absolutely devastated. And in the whole area around there, it's near a beautiful place called Mud Pond with cliffs, and the beautiful Quercus muhlenbergii, the yellow oak, right? And the place was like a whisper of what it had formerly been, and much of the adjacent land had become a nature conservancy preserve in the meantime.
Okay.
And I just couldn't believe what had happened in 10 years because of the deer, and it just happened so fast. So, that's the blink of an eye. It's only, it's 30 years ago. But I think we can restore, those plants are still there. If you could manage the deer, if you could, give the plants some protection, I bet you those genotypes are still there. I bet you they're still, hanging in, barely visible, hard to find, but they would probably come back.
I remember my thought that I had lost earlier, and we were talking about restoration, and restoration really is just like a Band-Aid, and you're bringing up some great points that we need to get ahead of it. If we can prevent some of these problems, it would be less that we would have to restore. We're just kind of fixing the problems that have happened because of the deer, but we're not really fixing, deer management. We've talked about it on so many episodes, how important it is to the health.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the big thing there is, we need to have real incentive to reduce the deer herd. We have to change the laws. Deer meat has to be a commodity so that there's an incentive to reduce the deer herd and then make it worth something.
Yeah.
That's the only way it's ever going to happen. The idea that, when you go to a restaurant, the venison has to come from the other side of the planet, from some deer farm is just an atrocity. That has to change. It's going to be hard to change. Requires both federal and state legislative changes in terms of, the game laws, but it needs to happen because we're losing so much.
Well, you mentioned, maple leaf viburnum coming back when you put up the enclosure. That was something that you saw all the time. Now you very rarely see it. When I was an undergraduate at Rutgers in general ecology, we did a project in Kilmer Ecological Preserve in Piscataway on the branching structure and the leaf structure and the shade and the light intensity under maple leaf viburnum shrubs. Okay.
And the maple leaf viburnum shrubs were 6 and 8 feet tall. You had to claw your way through them in 1978 in Piscataway. And if you go to Kilmer Woods now, they're gone. I think maple leaf viburnum was the first to go. They're so highly preferred by deer.
Yeah. But
if you put up a fence, they come back. They're still there. There's little roots, and it's unbelievable. They come back.
Yeah.
So
that's a great, and to me, that's a success story. One of the things we're going to ask you, we talked about all the issues with the forest and the land that we're trying to conserve. What are some of the success stories that you've had on, let's say on NJCF land? Like, has there been any rare flowers that? Oh,
sure. Our stewardship staff, we have a stewardship staff of, 4 or 5 people.
Okay.
Headed by Tim Morris, and Russell Julig is our Franklin Parker Preserve manager, and he has volunteers, expert botanists searching for rare plants and doing inventories. When we submitted our forest stewardship plan to the Pinelands Commission and the DEP, we had done a full ecological inventory of the Parker Preserve. It took us many years. I worked on the herps and the amphibians and that sort of thing, all the rare herps. We've documented, all the critical habitat for all the rare snakes and the rare amphibians and that type of thing through radio tracking, through, nighttime surveys, that kind of thing. Russell's botany volunteers have found rare species of plants, almost every rare plant that you would expect to find in the core of the Pine Barrens. We've documented as many locations as would.
Wow.
There's a few plants, I'm sorry, I don't have the names at the tip of my tongue, but there's, a few plants at the Parker Preserve. One of them, someone I think right now is doing the DNA work. It might be endemic to Burlington County, New Jersey. It's
Wow.
It might be a different species of false asphodel that occurs nowhere else except Burlington County, New Jersey. Then there was, for Pete's sakes, we have, some other, I probably shouldn't even mention what they are because it's
Yeah, people
worried about collectors. We've had problems, we've had problems.
Have you had problems with people going in and collecting?
Well, we're sure that animal poaching is a problem.
Okay.
It's probably not as bad as it used to be.
Okay.
But it's still a bit of a problem. I did a project, with high school kids, the old railroad that runs through Chatsworth, the old Jersey Central Railroad.
Yeah.
That's kind of a funny story in itself, right? The Jersey Central Railroad was built in the 1800s to ship all the caviar from the town of Caviar on Delaware Bay up to Perth Amboy, so it could go to New York. And of course, that didn't last long because the people in Caviar wiped out the sturgeon.
Yep.
And because they were filling up railroad cars with sturgeon eggs. And then I read the newspaper from the late 1800s in the Cumberland County Historical Society office. And the people of Caviar said that they had fallen unto God's disfavor. They did not know why God took their sturgeon from them, and they didn't know what they had done wrong. So they wiped out every female sturgeon in the ocean, just about, right? They're starting to come back now after 130 years.
Wow.
And they had no clue what they were doing. So anyway, that's the railroad. So anyway, in the early 1900s, the railroad was rebuilt and all the railroad ties were thrown to one side when the new railroad ties were installed. So you have all these railroad ties laying in the woods and they were all creosote soaked. And the creosote didn't penetrate into the interior of the railroad ties. So there are all these railroad ties everywhere and they're like big hollow logs. So, and they're loose because they're just laying on the forest floor. So everyone has known forever that if you want to go find rare snakes, you just go flip all the railroad ties.
Yeah.
So we did a big project a couple of years ago in the Franklin Parker Preserve, and we got rid of all the railroad ties.
Okay.
Because the snakes don't need railroad ties. That just puts them in contact with people, right? The snakes can do just fine in the forest. They don't need those hollow railroad ties. They can find natural places, but they like the railroad ties. So if the poachers just walk up and down the railroad tracks, flipping railroad ties, and take all the snakes away. So we had a big high school what do you call those things? Service day.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the high school kids came and they got into it like, we're going to get rid of all these railroad ties, and that's going to really piss off all the poachers. So they thought that was great.
How many snakes did they find during
it was the middle of the winter when all the snakes were in hibernation.
That's
if we did it in the summer, then all the kids would have ended up in the hospital with tick and chigger bites. So, so we just we did that in the winter, and then of course when the snakes came out of hibernation, it made it a little rough on the poachers.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but that's good. That's good. It should make it tough on them.
So, So anyway, I was just mentioning that, we did this survey for our forest stewardship plan of, all the rare species. We're finding, we did a controlled burn. This is really interesting. You'll like this. We did a controlled burn.
Okay.
And the New Jersey Forest Fire Service has been fantastic trying to do hotter controlled burns and burning into some really wet pitch pine lowlands and things to really, try to mimic some natural disturbance. And Russell, Julig, and Ryan Rebozo, who used to work for Pinelands Preservation Alliance, they did some plant transects to study the response of the control burn. And we found Nice Kern's beak rush coming up in the wake of the controlled burn, the prescribed burn,
Wow.
in a place that was not disturbed by people in any other way.
Wow.
In other words, Nieskerns beetrush growing in the forest floor,
Wow.
just because there was a fire.
I don't think a lot of the public just understands how important some of these burns are. Like, we know Pennsylvania sedge really doesn't produce a viable seed unless it gets burnt. Like, once it gets burnt down, it comes up and it produces a good seed, so it can reproduce. Without that, it kind of, it can falter a little bit. So it's important for a lot of these things to happen. Right.
And the first year after a burn, naturally, the insect populations are depressed, in that spot, but they quickly recover.
Yeah.
And the food chain quickly reforms. So, as long as there's heterogeneity in that there's a burned area here and an unburned area over there, things quickly move back in and recover. What's really interesting with our radio tracking of pine snakes is that the snakes don't really change much. They're habitual in where they go.
Okay.
Tom, I think your brother once helped me radio track some pine snakes. If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. He had so much fun. He said he didn't find enough snake stuff. He's a snake fanatic.
And so they develop these patterns, and they go to the same place every year on the same day almost.
Wow.
And it didn't matter if you burned the area, they still went to the same places. So, I mean, it could be that, in the year that the area was burned, well, okay, maybe they didn't find as many voles to eat or whatever, but they managed. And then, they just, they hung out in their territories. We saw a little bit of shifting going on in terms of some of the winter dens, perhaps because of the burning, but for the most part, they were oblivious to it.
Wow.
What else was I going to say about them? We have an interesting story. We were radio tracking a really large male rattlesnake, and we found it near Chatsworth one summer, right at the end of July. And we started radio tracking it, and as the fall approached, it started heading east, and we lost the signal on it. We didn't know where it went. We thought the radio died. Because the radios are supposed to last a couple of years, but sometimes they die prematurely.
Okay.
And so I went up in an airplane that winter and searched every stream corridor for that radio signal within 3 or 4 miles of Chatsworth, and I got no signal anywhere.
Okay.
So I thought, well, that pretty much confirms the radio died. The snake's nowhere. And or the snake could have got preyed upon and the radio could have been destroyed. That was, the other possibility. So then the next year, we were, radio tracking other snakes, and it came to the end of July. And I said, well, why don't we just go down and check, where that snake was the end of July? Because who knows, maybe it'll be sitting in the same place, and even though the radio's dead, maybe we'll find it on the same log, and then we can remove the radio.
Yeah.
Well, we went there and the radio was working.
All right.
So there was the snake in the same spot and the radio was working. So we're like, uh-oh, the radio's working. Where the heck was this snake last year? And it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So Fred Akers from Great Egg Harbor Watershed, he took it upon himself to make sure that we didn't lose the snake.
Yeah.
And he radio tracked it. It went 8 miles to the east.
Wow.
Until it found its winter den. And it never crossed the paved road. So it went clear across the pygmy pines to a new hibernaculum area that we discovered for rattlesnakes. And it made that same, 16-mile round trip 2 years in a row.
Wow. So,
this big male lived in Ocean County in the winter and came to Burlington County in the summer to find the girls. And then, so we learned a lot.
Yeah.
And, it was amazing because we wouldn't have been able to find it via an airplane because we couldn't fly over the bombing range. There's the Warren Grove bombing range.
Yeah.
So the only way that we were ever going to find that snake again is if it came back to the same place.
Wow.
And, we were lucky enough to hear the signal and realized that, the radio hadn't died at all.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic.
So I know Bob Zappalordi is publishing a paper now, about that being the farthest anyone has ever recorded for a round trip of a rattlesnake during the course of the season.
And just think if that land hadn't have been preserved, all that would have been lost.
Right. Well, and that just goes to show you, right? This think of what these things need in terms of square miles.
Yeah.
Without pavement, as soon as you put a paved highway, that's what I worry about. For example, in the Pine Barrens, we've saved all the land, right? Look at the map, for Pete's sakes. We've saved almost all the land, right? But there are creatures that cannot get across those highways.
Mm-hmm.
Those highways, those county roads have so much traffic on them now that they might be isolating populations genetically, not birds, not insects, but, reptiles and amphibians and reptiles and amphibians and other things that can't fly or run fast.
And when you fragment those populations genetically, that raises
that could lead to
lead
to extinction.
Exactly.
Because the patches are too small.
Yep.
So we've saved all the land. I mean, my vision for the Pine Barrens, 100 years from now, is that there will be huge sections of elevated roadway. But of course, that means that society would have to spend money on, building elevated roadway instead of bombs.
Mm-hmm.
But who knows if that'll ever happen.
Yeah, we'll save that one for the government's role in restoration, because I'm sure over 30 years you've seen it go back and forth depending on whoever's in office. How the policies change. Just if you have who's a little more environmentally friendly or not.
Well, and we're making I'm on the Endangered Species Committee. That people do great work, on the Endangered Species Committee, the staff of the Endangered Species Program. They're so dedicated, and they've created these amphibian tunnels, in certain places so that bog turtles and rare amphibians, rare salamanders can start getting across roads again and things like that. We've got to do a lot of that. And sometimes we can do it when, highways get upgraded, but sometimes you just need money. You need to just do it.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm sure those are the things that get overlooked pretty quickly when money gets involved.
Yep.
Right.
So,
well, and there's this great new thing called Change, connecting habitats across New Jersey, CHANJ.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The Endangered Species Program has worked on. You can find it on the on the web, CHANJ.
We'll have
and
to,
it's a mapping tool to show you where all these connections need to be made for wildlife corridors and that kind of thing. But the same thing, there's an interesting group of people at the Parker Preserve. We call them the mushroom people. It's the mycological enthusiasts, right? They go out and they do field trips every few weeks and they just scour the place for all the different species of fungi. They've been doing it now for about 10 years.
Wow.
And they're still amassing new species every year, roughly 50 to 75 species a year that they haven't seen before.
That's amazing.
Up to about 1,000 species now for the Franklin Parker Preserve. Many of them have never been seen in New Jersey before this survey was done.
Wow.
A lot of them are from the South, which you would expect.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first things to show the impact of climate change are all these fungi that are coming from the South because they have no trouble getting here. So it's easy for, but the point is easy for fungi to move around. It's not so easy for, snakes to move around.
Yeah.
No,
or rare plants. I mean, rare plants, my goodness. There's a rare plant, at the High Point Monument.
Mm-hmm.
It's an Arctic species. With climate change, the habitat for that plant in New Jersey is going to go up into the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not going to be able to survive. And, other, weeds, like I said before, weeds will win. Weeds go everywhere, but rare plants, they're not just going to move around. And it's not what they do.
And we've learned so many of those rare plants have symbiotic relationships with other things in that area. They can only exist in that area because of the relationships they have with other plants or other things in the soil. So it's, once that changes, they can't exist anymore. So it's rare for a reason. It's unique to that area because that area is unique. And when you change it, There you go.
There's the Agaro skipper. I think I'm pronouncing it right. The Agaro skipper. It's a butterfly. Its caterpillar needs Pine Barrens reedgrass.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if you guys grow Calamovilfa, Pine Barrens reedgrass.
No. Do not. No.
But it's not uncommon. I mean, you find it here and there all around the Pine Barrens. It's like you can pretty much go out any day and find Calamovilfa, but you don't find vast populations of it because there aren't enough wildfires.
Yeah.
And if you have a wildfire, if you burn the entire population, you burn all the caterpillars, right?
Yeah.
So you need heterogeneity. You need populations of Calamovilfa, Pine Barrens reedgrass that are extensive, and then you need for them to burn, but you need not for all of them to burn.
Yeah.
Think of how complicated that is, because everything we do is so homogeneous. Treat this patch, treat that patch, and that everything's way more complicated than that.
And it's interesting, we've talked about it all the time when we've had Sam Drogi on and so many other people that, with this science, we're just finding how much we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
All this new science, we're realizing what have we lost or what have we missed already. We're just collecting this now, but there's, in such a short period of time and decades, but this has been here for eons, and you're just figuring out, we just know a small portion. Small portion.
Yeah, we know, it's embarrassing how little we know.
Yeah. So,
but
for NJCF, do you do public outreach? Like, is there education or outreach to the public, or are you more behind the scenes that way? Or do you leave that to other organizations that you work with?
We don't have an education department. Now and then all the staff people get asked to do a talk here or there, and we'll do that, on a limited basis if we have time, and if it's not too far away, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Certainly, we have some small events, at our headquarters, or little events at the various preserves. We're trying to step that up, especially in the urban areas with our Camden project, at Gateway Park. Yeah. We have a couple of staff people in Camden now working on the issues surrounding all the greenways in Camden and the environmental justice issues, and trying to get the community there plugged into the environment. So we're nibbling at it, but that's not a primary role. Some organizations have large education departments and spend a lot of time on teacher workshops or having kids come in. That's we do a little bit of that.
And you work with a lot of great organizations that do that. So together you're covering all the bases, because they have the means for education, but maybe not the means for conservation.
And then of course, by collaborating with them, we get to discuss the topics so that hopefully they're teaching, they're getting insights and teaching about interesting things that we're learning about from each other.
Yeah. Now, just because I keep meaning to ask and I keep forgetting, your background, you have a snake that's looming just outside your head. What type of snake is that?
Okay, so that's a common species in the Pine Barrens. That's a rough green snake.
Okay.
And there's a good story behind this snake. One of the parcels that we recently acquired, about 1,800 acres to expand the Franklin Parker Preserve.
Okay.
We acquired in the last few years. And then another 900 acres near Brennan Burns State Forest was owned by a particular landowner who had owned it for, since probably the 1950s or 1960s. A landowner from the family was from northern New Jersey. Okay. And we had started working with that family in the 90s. No, actually, early 90s. What happened is we right off the side of Route 72 in near Chatsworth was a property that the Diamond Shamrock Mining Corporation had donated to us.
Okay.
It used to be called, I believe it was called Governor's Hill. If you look at old topographic maps, it was sand and gravel hill. And it was mined away. I don't know when it was mined away, probably in the 60s or something. And Burlington County asked us to acquire it because they wanted to start a park system. This was in the 1970s.
Okay.
And so we did. And then the Pinelands Act was passed, and then Burlington County never did start a park system at that time. They have one now.
Yeah.
A wonderful park system. But
Burlington County does really, we're in Burlington County. We've actually had Burlington County parks on.
Yeah, I was going to say that one.
Episode
Episode
4. Episode 4.
So, but I mean, the creation of their park system kind of got delayed in when the Pinelands Act was passed, or at least in that part of the county, because all of a sudden there was, all the Pinelands Act rules, and there was less of a need, to preserve land.
Yeah,
they felt. So, anyway, so we ended up stuck with this sand mine, and during the 1980s, while I was in Wisconsin, right, and not working for New Jersey Conservation Foundation, that's when all of a sudden, the whole idea of monster trucks and off-road vehicles and all sorts of stuff started to really blossom.
Yeah.
So in the late, 1990, when I started working for NJCF, I went to that sand mine property that we owned, and it was unbelievable. I had a meeting, maybe at White's Bog or at the Pinelands Commission, and I said, okay, it's Friday afternoon, I'll go check on, let me go see what that property is all about. Mm-hmm. So I had a little tiny Honda, and I drove in there, and I could barely get in there with my Honda because the road was all messed up.
Okay.
And when I got there was a pit in the bottom of where the gravel hill had been. It was a sand pit with water in the bottom, and there was a truck on fire with 2 giant chains attached to it, and 2 monster trucks pulling the truck that was on fire in a tug of war.
Wow.
And to see who was going to pull the other monster truck into the water.
Wow.
That was what was going on. And then there were people firing weapons into the sand and doing all sorts of crazy stuff. And I mean, I was just blown away.
Yeah.
And what I didn't do was I didn't walk up to all those people and say, excuse me, we're the landowner and you're not allowed to be here. I chose not to do that. So then what happened is we started inquiring and working with the neighbor who was the landowner of this large tract of land, and working with off-road vehicle folks who were responsible. And we created the New Jersey Off-Road Vehicle Park in Chatsworth.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right. And that was a special permit from the Pinelands Commission for 10 years to run an off-road vehicle park and to restore the land while the park was being run. The off-road vehicle park was a separate nonprofit. And then after 10 years, hopefully they would save all their money from their memberships. Yeah. And then they would go and contract to restore another gravel pit somewhere in the Pine Barrens.
Nice.
And they got lots of money from the National Recreational Trails Act money, and they bought trail groomers, and they put in an irrigation system, and they had equipment containers, and they ran this park, and they were trying to run it beautifully. And the renegades, what I would estimate to be like 96 or 97% of the off-road vehicle community are kind of renegades.
Yeah.
They would destroy everything regularly.
Wow.
Because they didn't want to pay membership, and they didn't want to have rules, and they didn't want to be told, oh, you can't ride over here. You have to go to the legal place. Right. So unfortunately, the whole thing failed because they couldn't save any money. Their insurance costs skyrocketed. Everything kept getting destroyed. And then when it came to the end of the 10-year temporary permission from the Pinelands Commission, we had to shut it down. And since then, we've restored it.
Okay.
And we have a project right now to improve the pine snake habitat on the property. And but that was the end of the off-road vehicle park.
Wow.
And that's adjacent to this landowner that we started working with at the same time in 1990. And then we finally finished negotiations with them. And that's where the green snake comes in. So we were about $1 million short in the acquisition funds. And so a major donor was interested in helping us, preserve land. And we took a tour in the Pine Barrens, and I found one of these guys crossing the trail. and it sat with us at lunchtime and climbed around a pine tree, and it just sat with us while we ate our lunch. And this family was so enamored with this little green snake. One of the comments they made to us was, well, yeah, we'll give you $1 million for this acquisition. Just make sure that you take care of these green snakes.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow.
Right.
Wow.
So when we had the dedication, a couple of days before the dedication, one of these green snakes crossed my path. So I picked it up and put it in my jacket pocket. So, because I wanted to pull it out at the demonstration, at the dedication event, to surprise the family. Well, unfortunately, somebody took ill, and we had to postpone the dedication from September until November.
Oh.
So now it's time for these guys to go into hibernation. So I made a condominium for the green snake at my house. Right. And it was a female. So she thought she went to Florida for the winter because she stayed warm, and I kept feeding her crickets, and she got fatter and fatter and put on weight. And then at the dedication in November, I was able to pull it out of my pocket and show it to the donors and say, here's the green snake, that we're going to take good care of it. And of course, we released it in the springtime back to where it belonged.
Awesome.
And it was really funny because at the dedication, she had grown, like 20% in body weight.
Yeah.
We made a big joke out of it, how when all the males came out of hibernation in the spring, they were going to take one look at her, and she was going to be like the queen of the hop.
That's we did talk about, we had Ryan Rebozo on, and we just talked about off-road vehicles and how much damage, and it's, just remember, like, you did the right thing not approaching them. At one time at Princeton Nurseries, we had 3,000 acres, and there was one farm in the back. There was a prime fishing location, and I was there after hours, and there was a group of men there that I knew they weren't employees, and I was going to go up to them to let them know that they were on private property and they weren't welcome. And as I was pulling up, one of them reached in, his waistline and pulled out a handgun and just put it on the roof of the
no,
just so I could see that he had it. And I was like, you know what? They can fish. I'll let them, they win this one, but just be safe.
Yeah.
So, one of the things we always like to ask towards the end is just how you found your way into this industry. What made you want to do this for a living or go to college for this? Did you even know when you went to college that this is what you wanted to do?
No, when I started college, I thought I wanted to be a mathematician or a physics major, and I was doing that. And I worked in the summer at the particle accelerator at Rutgers, and it became very boring. And at the same time, my brother had returned home from the Peace Corps and took me bird watching, and I started watching birds. And I went to my advisor in the physics department, and I said, I think I'm going to switch my major. And he got all mad at me. But I did. I switched majors and was fortunate enough to be assigned to Ted Stiles, whom you may have hopefully met in your earlier years before he passed away. So unfortunately, at such a very young age in 2007. But anyway, he was my mentor. He was Michael Van Cleff's mentor. So he's, there's so many of his sort of kids running around, New Jersey still. And he was incredible. Right. So that was probably where it all started, was when I was lucky enough to meet Ted Stiles and Stuart Pickett, who took me to the Pine Barrens for the first time in 1978, I believe.
Wow.
And that was it. As soon as I saw the Pine Barrens, I was hooked. That was it.
That's awesome.
And then I went to Wisconsin. I studied in the Pine Barrens, and trying to think, came back in 1988 and started working for NJCF in 1989. A couple of things there, right? My brother took me bird watching. I met Ted Stiles and Stuart Pickett. I was very lucky. And I guess that's pretty much it.
The rest is
that's how I got into this deal, right?
Yeah. So before we ask you the last most important question, how can the public that's listening to the podcast right now, if they want to get involved or help, is there a way they can make a donation or get involved at all with the NJCF with organizations that maybe monitor or do things like that?
Yeah, so sure. I mean, we have ability to utilize volunteers,
Okay.
interns. You can go to our website and which is, just Google New Jersey Conservation Foundation. Go to our website and you can find out about, volunteer opportunities and opportunities for interns. If you're interested, you just send us an email.
Awesome. It's
njconservation.org.
Yeah.
Yeah. You just send us an email and somebody will get back to you.
Awesome.
It depends on where you live, what you might like to do. Certainly, making donations is always incredibly welcome.
Awesome.
And
you have properties all throughout New Jersey, north, south, and central.
yeah, all throughout New Jersey. We have, like I said, we have a preserve in most counties.
Okay.
Some are small, some are big. Certainly,
And if
there's
you go on your guys' website, it has a list of all those properties as well, and all the projects that you guys are associated with.
Right, and there are even properties that aren't even on there because there are too many to put them all on the map. So if you really want to do stuff, when we know where you live, we can think of something that might be appropriate. Or, when COVID is over, there's no end to the work that people can help us out with in the office too. So.
Wonderful. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Tom, did you have anything before I ask the last question?
A couple other things I see just on your guys' website is you typically have the New Jersey Land Conservation Rally. You didn't have it this past year.
Right.
So
the land rally is usually a big project of ours with, many partners, of course, putting that together. And obviously we missed it. It had to be canceled last year, I think. Right. That was.
I don't know if it was say canceled for last year. It's canceled for this year, but on the website it says what.
No, I've lost. This thing that we're going through. It's hard to remember what happened anymore. But we did our major, sort of our yearly gala. We did that. On the we did that on the internet. I can't remember what happened to the land rally last year. I think it was canceled.
I think it was canceled.
Then another thing I see you guys do is there's you did it in 2020 was Coffee and Conservation, which is a pretty cool looking program where you had people could register for different programs. One of them, the first one, was with you, which was owl calling.
Yeah, well, we have a series of walks usually at our main office, which is in the Morris County Park, Bamboo Brook, which is a beautiful, beautiful place. We live in one of their old turn of the 100 plus year old buildings over there, and it's a beautiful grounds. It was the woman who landscaped it was one of the first female landscape architects, and it was her family's property.
Oh, wow.
And it's just a beautiful place. Of course, I haven't been there in almost a year. We have little events. There's all sorts of stuff on the website.
Yeah.
All right, wonderful.
So one other question before we get to our final question, and that's, are there other organizations like this across the country or in other areas of the country that are doing something similar?
Well, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of land trusts that own conservation easements and own land. There aren't as many organizations like ours that do both policy work. Like we're involved in a lot of lawsuits. We're involved in a lot of legislation, advocating for various kind of land use principles, green acres, bond issues, permanent, funding for the acquisition of open space, that kind of thing. So, we kind of do both things, and sometimes it's very difficult because, on one hand, we want to get money from the DEP, and on the other hand, sometimes we sue the DEP. So, so we ride a very peculiar rail. But everybody's kind of used to that. They know that. So
surprisingly enough, when you look at our listens per state, that it's New Jersey, PA, New York, and then it goes California. It's our listening base is really all over the country. So we kind of focus here because this is what we know. But maybe we can look into some other ones that we can throw out there as well across the country, or maybe some of our listeners can throw some organizations at us.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, there are land trusts everywhere. If you Google the Land Trust Alliance, you'll see that there are land trusts in every state in the country.
Okay.
That are preserving land, and in many different unique ways. Just all sorts of different ways. Whatever fits. Every place has different tools, different ways of preserving land.
All right. So it's the important question, the big question that we ask everyone. So, and we've already negotiated concessions to this question before we went on the air. So the last question is always, what's your favorite plant? But you also want to do shrub, tree.
Yeah. So I'm going to give you my favorite tree is Nissus sylvatica black gum.
That's a great, I do love that tree.
My favorite small tree is Magnolia virginiana.
Nice. Very
nice. My favorite shrub is spice bush.
Okay.
And my favorite herbaceous plant is Indian cucumber root.
I don't know that one.
Yeah, me neither.
Mediola.
Okay.
And they all have one thing in common.
And that is?
That they have bird dispersed fruits.
Oh, very nice.
So black gum has little blackish purpley berries, and Magnolia has those incredible, fruit clusters that are filled with fat, lipids, actually really important for bird migration. Spice bush is one of the most nutritious fruits in the forest. Lindera has a fruit that's like 40 or 50% fat.
Wow.
And Indian cucumber root is a mimic. It has tiny little dark berries, and behind them, half of the leaves turn red so that the black berries can be seen from above with a red background, which is so crazy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I'm looking at the picture right now. That's very interesting.
Yeah, I'm going to
put that up on the screen or something. That would be incredible, because only the inner half of the leaves turn red, just to highlight the fruit.
Wow, that's awesome.
The fruits don't have any nutrition. They're fooling the birds that are up in the black gum tree. So naive birds that have never eaten them before, they're eating nutritious stuff, and then they see these little black things with a red background, and they come down and they eat them, and they get fooled.
One of the things I own about 1.25 acres, and it's an interesting property because it butts up to the New Jersey Turnpike. So there's an easement on the back end. There's 2 pipelines that run through it. But the rest of it, other than where the house is, was pretty much undisturbed. So it's all black gum, and there's a colony of Canada Mayflower and cinnamon fern.
Right.
And it's just, to me, it was, and there's beech and Magnolia virginiana, and I just loved that it was a lot of these great native plants right there, kind of, little patches of it undisturbed with the pipeline and the turnpike basically overlooking it. So, well,
some of these patches of soil that's never been farmed still have tremendous little plant communities on them.
Yeah.
And you can look on the old maps from the 1880s or from even 1930 and see what was forest, 150 or 100 years ago. And it's likely that it was never plowed. Anything that was forest in late 1800s or early 1900s, if you look on old maps and aerial photographs, likely they might have been grazed, but they wouldn't have been plowed.
Well, I guarantee you, where I live you would not be allowed to build houses there today, because everyone I know that grew up in this area, they're like, oh, that was all swampland.
Right.
So, there's skunk cabbage in my backyard, things like that. So it's just small patches, but it's great to see. So how we always end up the show after the final question is we give everyone a final thought. So this is a space where you get the mic, you can wrap it up. You can mention something that you want to promote, or just something that we didn't touch on. You have the floor to say whatever you want.
Well, I would just say that what we do in the next 50 years, 75 years, right, in terms of conservation of natural resources around the world, is what's going to make or break our future, right? We have the kids, today's kids, right? It's basically, my generation has really screwed stuff up, right? We're starting to turn it around now. We're starting to understand the problems.
Yeah.
We have the science. We know what needs to be done. Now, if some of the old people can just get out of the way, right, and let the kids take over and save this world, then the work we're going to do, that, the work we're doing now, and that the work these kids are going to do in the next 50 to 75 years, that's going to make all the difference.
Yeah.
So
Wonderful.
That's what I like. I like to think positive.
Awesome. Tom, you want to go or you want me to go?
Yeah, I can go.
All
It's another thing I've found on your guys' website was you actually have a get involved tab on the very top, and there's one that says take action under that tab, and it's telling people to call your local legislators and your New Jersey legislators and show your voice for conservation. That's something we've asked for before from our listeners. It never hurts to, and I'll even say personally, I get emails weekly, and it's, this bill is going into the House Assembly or the State Assembly. This one's going into this committee, and
Right.
And there's some stuff I like, there's some stuff I don't like, and when it's something that really moves me, well, I'll write to our local politicians or whoever,
and it makes a difference,
and saying, hey, this is something that I support, or this is something I don't agree with, and express your opinion. It doesn't hurt to do it.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, it actually really helps. So
exactly.
No, it's very important. It actually makes a difference. Every little bit makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
There are lots of legislators that actually do pay attention to what the public is saying.
Yeah. And if you don't say anything,
And,
then they'll never know.
They don't know. And
Right.
that kind of leads into mine. Mine's short and sweet. A lot of the things and topics that we talk about on the podcast are fixing problems on the back end.
Mm-hmm.
But in order to make a difference, we have to change things on the front end. And that takes everyone, that we all have to make changes or get involved somehow. So like Tom said, make a phone call or send an email or write a letter. We have to really change things because, eventually that dam's going to have so many leaks, we're not going to be able to fix it.
Yep.
So, it might take a new dam or a new way of thinking it. So that's mine.
Yeah.
There's
So that is it. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed listening to Dr. Emil DeVito from the New Jersey Conservation Foundation. For more information about NJCF, visit www.njconservation.org. Thank you everyone for listening to Native Plants, Healthy Planet.
I would love to give a big thank you to Egocentric Plastic Men for contributing our brand new theme music for these episodes. You can follow us on Twitter at Pineland Nursery, Facebook at Pinelands Nursery NJ, Instagram at Pinelands Nursery, and YouTube at Pinelands Nursery. After the last buzz, we got a slew of new followers on YouTube. We're only about 19 away from being able to get that custom URL. So keep clicking subscribe. We now have a question in comment line. Call us at 215-346-6189 and ask a question. If we pick your question or comment, we will play it and answer it on a future episode of The Buzz, just like we got a call last week while we were actually recording The Buzz. So we'll play that on the next one. And last but not least, don't forget the Native Plants Healthy Planet Facebook group. We picked up another 25 members. So that's great. Keep it going and keep spreading the word.
Yeah. So one thing with the YouTube channel is I've actually been taking these conversations, we're putting them up there as a video.
Yeah. And
then I'm even taking kind of the highlights of it. So I'm sure like the snake story, I'm going to cut that out of this episode, and it'll be that like 5-10 minute story will be split out, so you can just watch that if you don't want to listen to us ramble on the whole thing. you can just listen to the highlights, and it'll take 15-20 minutes instead of an hour and a half.
Yeah. Or you can
do both.
Yeah, exactly.
Why not?
Do it all.
So and you can submit original music, unless did we pick a winner?
No, we actually,
we got a winner.
It was the last minute, so we got to take that out. Yeah, we definitely have that now. So we have
new theme music for Root Discussion. So you missed your window. Unless we start a new segment, we're done with theme music until next year.
Yes, that's true.
But let's see, where are we?
You guys should have a little intermission with a quiz, like Click and Clack used to have.
I like that idea.
So you can listen to this podcast, Native Plants Healthy Planet, directly at www.nativeplantshealthyplanet.com. You can also check us out on Apple Podcasts, Podbean, Spotify, Stitcher, really wherever you consume your podcasts. Unless you're Russ Fenari, then you'll listen on the website.
He posted today and said he has switched to Podbean.
That's great.
Yeah.
He's moving up. progress. So you can even ask Alexa to play the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast. When you're going to listen, please subscribe, please leave a review. Those really go a long way.
Very important.
With our rankings and help promote this message to even more people.
Yes.
That's pretty good. Russ is a good friend of mine. It's hard to teach an old guy new tricks.
Yeah. I think I made fun of him enough.
Tom picks on him every episode. So he mentioned that he joined Podbean and he's been listening on there. Yeah.
So with that, I'm Tom.
And I am Fran. Thanks again, everyone. Emil, thank you so much for spending time with us today. And
my pleasure. That was great fun. Thanks.
Anytime. And everyone will see you again in about a month when we do our next Rooted Discussions. And Tom and I will see you next week with The Buzz. So until next time, keep it native.
Thank you for listening to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Remember to like, share, follow, and comment.